welcome everybody to this introduction to the 4th edition of the Bayley Scales of Infant and Toddler Development, commonly referred to as the Bayley, and this being the 4th edition. I'm going to be moving pretty quickly to ensure that we have time for my colleague James to give a sneak peek to the new digital features. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, or I'll be providing my contact information at the end so that you can shoot me a quick email and we can discuss things further. So today we're going to be covering the topics, the purpose of the Bayley-4, the revision goals, subtest changes, administration, some discussion of scoring and interpretation, and then also we're glad to introduce you to some digital features of this version. Now the purpose of the Bayley is to conduct developmental assessments for children, infants, and toddlers for developmental delays for early intervention services. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the IDEA, Part C specifically, and this is designed for the needs for early intervention that is mandated by federal legislation. Part C and specifically for Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004. Now, Part C, the Early Intervention Program for Infants and Toddlers with Disabilities, is a federal grant program that assists states in operating a comprehensive statewide program of early intervention service for infants and toddlers with disabilities, ages birth to 2 years, and their families. So specifically Part C is aimed at looking at developmental areas including physical development, including vision and hearing, cognitive development, communication, social and emotional development, and adaptive development, which happens to be the 5 areas that are specifically assessed by the Bayley-4. Now, of course, this is by design. So a quick overview of the Bayley. The core battery is constructed of cognitive, language, motor, social, emotional, and adaptive behavior. Now, this is an individually administered assessment, which I really couldn't imagine what a group administration would look like with an assessment such as this, but nonetheless, it is individually developed, administered. It is a paper and pencil, and an online feature is available, and James is going to just give you a quick peek at that a little bit later. Administration time is roughly around 30 to 70 minutes. I believe the Bayley-III was 30 to 90 minutes, so there has been some reduction in testing time. And this is obviously depending on the child's age, or more specifically, their developmental level. There are many scores available with this assessment, including scale scores, composite scores, percentile ranks, confidence intervals, developmental age equivalents, and growth scale values. One big change for this version is now available at a B level qualification, meaning those with master's level degrees are available to purchase and use the test. Also, those highly recommended that individuals had graduate level training in such things as test and measurements and the use of standardized assessments. It is designed for ages 6 days to 42 months. And scoring options are, obviously you can still do the manual scoring, but also Q Global System like Pearson is available for inter-raw scores, and getting a score report and some other reports are available. So let's take a quick look at the revision goals for this version. Now, I'm not going to read these. We're going to go through them individually as we go, but just to say that if you look at some of these, it's obvious that they are in contrary to each other, or they seem to be anyway, like improving age of content coverage and subtests, while at the same time trying to reduce the testing time and administration time and make it simpler. So these are the things that development teams typically lose sleep over and wrestle with, and that is trying to accomplish some of these very important things that we hear through lit reviews and professional interviews and from our customers, but also trying to maintain a robust test. So we're going to go through these individually and describe to you exactly how this was pulled off. So first of all, the first one is to maintain the basic qualities of the Bayley-III. And this is that it is a performance-based test of infants and toddlers, and it's done through observing the child's interactions with stimuli that we are specifically designed and instructed to use in order to engage the child and get them to perform a specific task, and then evaluating through observation how well they perform that task. Now, this version is obviously published this year. In September, I believe, is where we're expecting it to come out in 2019. The past beta was 2006. So we have about 13 years between the two editions. Next goal, we wanted to maintain the basic format of the Bayley-III. So if you're familiar with the Bayley-III and you've gotten very comfortable in administering it, no worries. It's not going to be that big of a difference. You're not going to see a huge change in the format and how it's administered and how you engage the child. There are some key differences that we're going to go over, so just keep in mind there are going to be a few things that are important for you to practice and learn and just be aware of. It still assesses the 5 domains, as you're familiar with, that being cognitive, language, motor, social, emotional, and adaptive behavior, again, to meet those IDEA requirements. The basic structure is still the same. You have your cognitive scale. Your language scale is broken up into receptive communication, expressive communication. The motor scale is broken into fine motor and gross motor, just as you're familiar with in the past Bayley. Again, we have the social emotional scale along with the adaptive behavior scale. The big difference with the adaptive behavior scale is now pulled from the Vineland-III rather than the ADBE from the Bayley-III. And the adaptive behavior is assessing communication, daily living skills, and socialization, with communication broken up again through receptive and expressive, and socialization broken into interpersonal relations and play and leisure. Now, one big change that you're going to notice with this version is the Polytomous scoring. The Bayley-III had a dichotomous scoring approach where basically if the skill is not performed well, then a score of 0 is given. If the behavior or the skill is demonstrated, they get a score of 1. Now you're going to have this Polytomous scoring approach where you're going to be evaluating the child's performance based on a level of performance. So therefore, if the skill is not present at all, you're going to get the score of 0 for that item. If it is emerging, meaning that they somewhat got it, they're almost there, they're demonstrating that a piece of that skill or that ability is present, but it's not quite there yet. It's not quite fully mastered. And if it's fully mastered and they're demonstrating that skill very well, then you're going to get them a score of 2. So this is one of those things you're going to have to keep an eye on and at what level of performance. We're going to talk a little bit more of that as we go through here. The next goal was to include caregivers in the evaluation. Now, as with the Bayley-III, we've always encouraged that the caregiver be present during the administration of the Bayley-III because of rapport and wanting to make sure the child is comfortable and that there's ample opportunity to elicit the behavior or the skill that you're trying to get from them. So the Bayley-IV now, we actually include items where, especially structured items, where if for some reason the child just does not want to perform that task, they are just not engaging with you for whatever reason, instead of continuing to try and spend more time trying to elicit that behavior, you can turn to the caregiver and ask them, is this something they're able to do at home? Do they do this every time? Do they have difficulty with this sort of task? And you can actually score that item based on the information given from the caregiver. There are also specific caregiver questions that are scored entirely on the caregiver's information. So this goal actually did help significantly to improve and to speed up not only the specific information that you collect, but also the speed of the test and getting through the material. The next goal is to simplify administration and reduce administration time. Again, this is not always an easy one to do, and it's a balancing act between having a robust set of test items versus having an overly extensive administration time. So to accomplish this, the things that were developed were first a development of a true global or a digital features that can help to increase the workflow, improve the workflow. And James is going to give you a good introduction to that in a few minutes. Also, some items were combined. And these are items that may have before been 3 separate items, now combined into 1 or maybe 2. And that helps to reduce test items. Eliminating redundant items, items that measure the same construct and have the same difficulty level, are considered redundant. So those items were analyzed, new data was collected to make sure that we're not removing something that adds sensitivity, but yet it doesn't contribute to the overall score. So those items were removed. And then incorporating the caregiver questions. That really did help to increase the efficiency of the administration. Next was to improve the age content coverage. In this, we're added items that assess neurodevelopmental and items that look at precursors to executive functioning. Now, our ability to assess infants evolves from the neurological to motor to sensory motor to cognitive function, more higher level functioning. Or put it another way, development proceeds from, say, basic skills like reaching and grasping to functional, reaching, grasping, and bringing the object to the mouth, as infants do, to a higher level, like an integrated functioning unit that, like overcoming a barrier to obtain an object, then bring it to the mouth, as is typical. So our earliest windows includes indicators of early neurodevelopment, and these precursors to executive functioning, such as basic problem solving, planning, object permanence, etc. So as with all product revisions, improving clinical utility is always going to be a revision goal. In order to do that, it's important to test and collect data from those populations who are determined to be at risk, at developmental risk. And in this case, we collected samples from extremely preterm and very preterm, and also those from that have a clinical diagnosis, such as autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, language impairment, and motor impairments. And with all product revisions, a goal is to update normative data. Now, one of the funny anecdotes that I usually share when we talk about updating norms, one of the things that drives this, the societal events. Sometimes even the entertainment industry contributes to this. One of the funny ones with the WISC 3, I believe it was, we had an item that was, who was Beethoven? And you can imagine thinking about, to your children's movies back in that time period, the answer we were getting was, oh, it's the big dog Beethoven on that movie. I'm like, no, that's not the answer we're looking for. So those not so little things, but the more they add up, the more push we have to renorm, along with the society and cultural norms start to change. So that's one of the things that drives most of our renorming process. In this case, it happened in 3 different samples. The first 2 samples were collected during the standardization phase, and that's being those for the cognitive, language, and motor normative samples. And the second was the social and emotional scale normative sample. Data for the adaptive behavior scale was collected as part of the development of the Bayley-III. The research question for the standardization focused on generation of norms and to provide reliability and validity and clinical utility evidence. Now, the data nerd in me would love to share with you and go in depth to all this data and all this wonderful wealth of information, but we'll save that for another time. But just suffice to say, the reliabilities of the normative sample were either equivalent and in some ways higher than the previous version. And that's all we'll say about that for now, but they look really good. That's even including the changes that were done with the Polytomous score and caregiver questions and stuff like that. The next revision goal was to increase the sensitivity. Now this is a tricky question, like I was saying before, about adding too many items and specific types of items. But the things that were done in this case were, one was to exclude children that are identified at risk from the normative sample. Typically, you want this perfect bell-shaped curve when you're doing standardization of a standardized test, such as ability tests, intelligence tests, things like that. And that usually includes including a percentage of those who are struggling and are having extreme difficulty, and that gives you that tail to the left. And then those that are really highly functioning, which helps give you that smooth tail to the right. But in this case, for the Bayley, that would actually water down the norms and make it more difficult to detect those that are struggling, because that's the only end of that bell-shaped curve that I'm really concerned about. So that was excluded from the samples for this version. Also, this introduction of the Polytomous scoring approach helped to increase sensitivity, and that is it gives you more data points to work with. The more data points you have to work with, the more decision points you actually have for your test items. So that was another thing that increases sensitivity. And also including those additional easier items for that early detection of those early neurodevelopmental issues was part of that process. So one more piece of data, because you know me, I'd love to sit here and talk about data all day, but we're not going to. The correlation with the Bayley-III, other correlations with similar instruments were as expected and to the degree anticipated. With the Bayley-III to Bayley-4, you can see that the correlations are very close with a slight decrease for all the scales except for fine motor. Well, we won't go into the discussions about what that means, but some other time we'll have to do that. So subtest changes. So let's go through those real quick. First, let's talk about the cognitive scale. The cognitive scale has retained most of the items from the Bayley-III. New items were added, and items deleted because of either they were redundant or they were combined with other scores. And you can see we have a reduction of 10 items down from 91 to 81 on the cognitive scale. On the language scale, added new items to reflect traditional language milestones and related speech, such as 50% or 75% intelligibility of a child's speech and things like that. Combined several items, and again, dropped the items that were redundant or construct overlap. This one we saw 42 items now remaining down from 49. And 37 items on the expressive communication down from 48. The motor scale shows the greatest reduction in time savings. And this were added to some items for the age content coverage, and that's that neurodevelopmental areas that we wanted to really make sure we have well represented. Again, combining items and dropping those items that are redundant. And this is about 46 items on the fine motor, which is down from 46. So 20 items savings there, and the gross motor 58 items, down from 72. Social motor scale, the items are unmodified from the Greenspan social emotional growth chart. And the adaptive behavior scale, this was adapted from the Vineland-3, which are the appropriate. And this is quite a process to make sure that you've pulled out the right content areas, but also items that are relevant to the age group that we're talking about. And looking at assessment, communication, daily living skills, socialization, and an overall adaptive behavior composite. So look at the administration. Let's take a quick look at some of the features that we got. So we still have the hand scoring methodology that you can use. It's a straightforward paper and pencil record form, just like you're used to traditional paper and pencil. But there's also a Q Global feature that James is going to discuss here in a few minutes. So the paper administration, the Bayley kit includes, of course, your administration manual and your technical manual. This is something we all love, our technical manuals. And I, speaking from experience and someone who helped write the Bayley-III technical manual, yes, they are as boring to write as they are to read, but they are very important, and we highly, highly encourage, and it's actually should be mandatory that you read these manuals. Now, if you're having sleep difficulty, they work really good for that, but it's important to understand the makeup, how a test is constructed, what it's meant to measure, what's the construct, and be down to specifics, because that's very important to guide you in your administration, your scoring, your observations, really understanding the nuts and bolts of a test. So I highly encourage that you read these manuals, and I know you all do. You also have your cognitive language and motor record forms, motor response booklets, still the drawing and the crayons and the pencils, the social, emotional, and adaptive behavior questionnaires. You have a caregiver report, and this is a valuable little tool here that I would highly recommend you take a look at, because back in the days when I was doing these assessments, the hardest part of my day was having to tell a caregiver that something's wrong, that it's not a good report. On one hand, it is good that we've detected it now, But on the other hand, you're still having to give bad news to a caregiver, and that's not an easy thing to do. So this is something that's designed to help with that process. It helps to explain what the test is measuring, what it does, what the scores mean, and also give some recommendations on things they can do at home that could help to improve the quality of the environment. So it's a very good tool to take a look at. You have your stimulus book, your observation checklist, and obviously your manipulative stat. Now, if you remember, the Bayley-III kit is quite large. I think we've reduced that somewhat, but it's still quite a job to manipulate all these things. So there's something we'll talk about administration in a minute, that will help out with that process. So administration rules, there are still start points. They're age-based. Correctional for prematurity through 24 months. So that's 24 months, if I believe I have this correctly. My colleagues on the phone will help me with this if I'm wrong, but that's through 24 months, 30 days. At 25 months, then that's where that's off. The basal is 3 consecutive scores of 2, and reversal is a previous start point. And discontinue, it's 5 consecutive scores of 0. Now, this is for all 3 of the subtests that are administered. We'll talk about the social, emotional, and the adaptive in a second, what the rules are there. But these just happen to be the same for all 3 of them, which is great. And that doesn't always work out that way. And this is a data-driven decision. We get the question and complaint a lot that why do these start points and discontinues, why do they change? Well, based on a lot of different factors. So just know that it is very much a data-based decision that we have very little control over, and that we have to stick with the data and what the data tells us to do. Administration guidelines, there are item orders, and we always recommend that you follow the order of the administration: cognitive, receptive communication, expressive communication, fine motor, then gross motor. However, in this we have built in some flexibility for the Bayley-4, meaning that, for example, you have a child who's just not engaging. You have a toddler who's shy or just having a difficult time building rapport, and they're just not ready to perform some cognitive tasks. It's absolutely okay to jump to the gross motor, get them moving, get them engaged in something that they may seem to be a little more fun, maybe even just a little easier and comfortable for them to engage in that kind of behavior. So that's perfectly okay. Series items are there to also to speed things along. People have various examiners that I've talked to over the years, and as well as myself, you have ways of organizing your materials, making sure that you have all your toys, manipulatives in order, ready to go, little bags with compartments. So I've seen various people have various ways of organizing that, and that's a great thing to do. Same with this, and the series items are items that have the same instructions, and they use the same materials. Same with related items, use the same materials, but they have different instructions. But still, it will help to keep the flow of the assessment going if you maintain that order of administration and utilize those series items and related items in order to speed things up. And then multiple trial items. Again, those are required to make sure that you get the first ones and then continue on. And those are identified on the record form. So series items, like I said, they have the same instructions, and they are indicated on the paper record form by these bubbles. So you know exactly if you, at 21, go ahead and administer 26, 29, and 45. That will allow you to put that toy away, put that manipulator away, and move on to the next series. Whereas your related items, they have different instructions, but they're using the same materials. So again, if you want to prevent having to jump around and move around too much with grabbing materials back and forth, you can follow the guidelines for your related items. On the digital version, which Jane's going to show you, it's going to help guide you through that. Here's what the multiple trial items will look like on both the paper and the digital versions. So getting back to the item scoring, this is the Polytomous scoring. Again, this is something to be very aware of and make sure that you rehearse and just get this into your routine and understanding. Although I will caution you on getting into too much of a routine, because it's very easy to get in what we call scorer drift or examiner drift, meaning little changes turn into little bigger changes, and then before long, the item is very different than what it was originally designed to be. And we see that with our examiners sometimes during our standardization, and we watch that very closely and make sure that we retrain pretty regularly and encourage them to go back and read those instructions even though you think you have them memorized. So this item scoring, this 0, 1, 2, again, this is all about getting us more information per item, not missing those children who they're not quite there at the mastery level, but they're going to show you a little bit of development on that. And that's a different answer to an individual item. Is there nothing there, or is there a little bit there? And that's good information and helps us to be more sensitive. Also, keeping in mind that the caregiver questions are scored the same way. So being sure that when you elicit that, is this something that they show all the time, sometimes, or never? Keeping that information in mind is important. Now, incidental observations are very, very important. The more you familiarize yourself with the test, the more you know what items are coming up, what are available, the more your incidental observations are going to help you to score items without even having to administer them. Now, this can start in the waiting room. It can start as soon as you start to engage the caregiver and the child. You're observing that child and you're seeing and watching what they're doing. If they elicit a behavior spontaneously anywhere during this process, please feel free to go ahead and score that item when you get to it and move on. It will very much help to speed up administration. And also remembering to use the observation checklist so that as you're going through, you familiarize yourself with that checklist, access it, score it, and that way you can just keep on moving. Now, the questionnaires, the social, emotional, and adaptive behavior questionnaires, these are paper pencil forms. Now, where and when you administer these is really going to be depending on the environment. If you have a toddler that's very engaged with you and the parent can be filling this out as you go, that's one possibility prior to or after the session. But there's also a digital option that James is going to tell you about in a second. But these are available on remote administration, which can very much speed up the process by having these done before the caregiver shows up for the session. So the social, emotional, and adaptive behavior, be aware of their administration instructions so that you can make sure that the caregiver understands them, because inevitably they'll end up filling out the whole thing when they really didn't need to, and there's just a whole lot of redundant stuff there. So save some frustration, make sure they understand to start at item 1, for both of them. On the social emotional, stop when they reach the stop point based on the child's age. Just to remind them that there is a stop point for their child's age and that to remember where to stop. Same with the adaptive behavior. Start with item 1, but stop in section when they reach the circled scores of a 0 in a row. 5 scores of 0 in a row. So same as our discontinue on the other scales, and they need to be aware of that. So be sure to remind them of those rules. So I am now going to turn it over to my colleague, James, if you're available, to give us a quick little sneak peek into the digital features.
You bet. Thanks so much, Paul. And good morning, everyone. My name's James Henke. I'm going to start here with a slide that Paul had mentioned a few minutes ago. And he's talking about or listing out these different materials that are required for the paper administration of the test. So the manual, the forms, the response booklets, the stimulus book, and so on. When we look at this now from the angle of a digital administration, we're able to render much of these materials online. So the manual, both administrative, technical, the record forms, the response booklets, the social and emotional adaptive behavior questionnaires, the reports, and the observation checklist. All of those components can be done in a paperless manner. Now, the stimulus book is is still in paper form, as well as the manipulative set, and they kind of come together as a set. So let's kind of take a brief look at what that looks like. Now, I'm going to be focusing in on what this, not the questionnaire part of it, but more on the motor and cognitive and expressive and receptive aspects of this. Now, I have an assessment here kind of queued up, and the age of my John Doe child here is 12 months, 22 days. Prior to starting, I do have the ability to make adjustments as it relates to starting points for the suggested starting points based upon prematurity. Now, as I click the Begin Assessment button, it brings me straight into the test. Now, I'm going to start up here at the Review section. Now, you can see across the top part of my screen the different subtests within the Bayley-4. So cognitive, receptive, expressive, fine, and gross motor. Under this Review section, you can see these listed out again, as well as the age-appropriate starting point kind of ready for you right here. So I'll start with fine motor, for example. I have not started the subtest, so I can start at item 9. So I can click on item 9 from here or navigate to it through the subtest menu across the top. So if I click on the fine part of it, it brings me straight to item 9. We've tried to organize the layout here to be consistent regardless of the items that you're looking at. So again, you have the ability to jump between subtests across the top, and over on the left-hand side, you can see the full item list. So here, and then of course on the screen itself, we can see the item. So any materials required for this specific item would be listed. The position of the child would be indicated, as well as some instructions, and you can see the polytomous scoring options down here at the bottom. Also critical here, or a nice feature, is the ability to log specific comments at any point as you move throughout the assessment. So instead of writing in the margins in shorthand on a record form, you're able to be a little bit more verbose and frankly legible by typing them in down here at the bottom. So as I administer this item and I give a score, I can go to the next item in sequence just by clicking the next item button at the bottom. Alternatively, I can also navigate simply by clicking on the items down the left side of the page. Now I'm going to actually jump ahead now to item 11 right here, because this is one of the items that leverages materials or manipulatives. So the material here is the ring with the string. We have really nice images integrated throughout that will talk about what that setup needs to look like. So rather than needing to scan through or look through page after page of paper, having these instructions on screen on each item makes it really easy to transition from one item to another, or one item type to another. Now to take that a step further, if you look down here on the left side, way down here in the lower left, this is where we have the ability to filter items by type. So we happen to be on an item that leverages the ring with a string, and if I want to administer the rest of these in sequence, I'm able to do so. So if I click ring with string down here in the lower left, you can see that it sorts it accordingly. So items 2, 3, 5, 6, 11, and 16 would be the ones that leverage this material. Really nice, really nice. Now, in addition to that, we also have integrated the caregiver questions where the child may not or will not provide a response. And so you can see that the verbiage here is verbatim that you would ask the caregiver to and then subsequently indicate that you gave the question to the caregiver and scored it accordingly down at the bottom. We have, as you have seen, we have integrated the start point rules, but we also have integrated the discontinue rules as well into the system. So in this case, after 5 consecutive scores of 0, the discontinue rule will pop on screen, allowing you to then move very cleanly into another set of content. So let's see how that looks. So if I start on item 9 and I score this as 0, I'll move into the next item. Oops, haven't established my basal yet. Let's do that. So I'll give this a score of 2. I'll give this a score of 2. I'll give this a score of 2. And now I'll start to trigger my discontinue rule. Now, one thing that is also very nice is there's going to be a variety of items that also leverage this way of scoring as well. So please select the image that best represents the manner in which the child grasps the block. And simply by selecting it, it will leverage that image into scoring. So as I selected this first one here, you can see how that cascaded through. If I go to this one, you can see that the score changed. So now we have a 2 and a 2. And if I look at this one, here we have a 1 and a 2. Simply by recognizing the manner in which they have grasped the block, we've kind of integrated ways to kind of get the test out of your face a little bit and allow you to better engage the child. Now, I will score this as 0s because now what I want to do is show you that discontinue message. And here's another design of that similar type where the scoring would cascade through. And I think this would be my last one. There we go. You've assigned a score of 0 on 5 consecutive items for the subtest, which means the discontinue rule has been met. Would you like to move on to the next subtest or discontinue working on this? Okay, so essentially kind of testing the limits, probing a little bit more deeper, or just discontinuing it, which I will do now. Okay, I'll now jump into a different couple of items. This one here, I'll go to the expressive subtest, and I'm going to show you one item that I also think integrates this way of pictures cascading into scores really nicely. I'm going to go down to item 36. So on 36, you have a series of trials. And down here, you can score them through the X or the check. All right, so you can see the score criteria down here at the bottom. So as you ask these questions, if there are, for example, 3 correct or 4 correct, the score is provided accordingly. If I have 2 incorrect like this, you can see that that score changes to a 1, and then it drops down to a 0. That type of scoring, I think, just makes things a little bit easier and cleaner, and it's one less thing it's one less detail to be, in a sense, concerned about while you're moving from these, from item to item. So we saw how the basal rule is leveraged within the system. We saw how the discontinue criteria is applied. We saw some of the pictures cascading into scoring options, as well as what we saw here with the various combination or types of responses you could get over the course of several trials. Now, all of this data is going to be captured and leveraged directly into a score report. So I have a sample score report available to kind of take a peek at right now. And keep in mind, this isn't in its final form. There's going to be a couple more changes and tweaks and improvements as we get closer to release. But as you go from one page to another, the raw scores, scaled scores, age equivalents, the GSVs are also going to be listed within this as well. And some additional analysis comes through additionally. Now, in addition to that report, there is also the caregiver report that is also produced from the administration of this test. And so I'm just, the intent here is not to necessarily unpack all of the information contained within it, but more just to indicate that these reports are available for you as soon as the administration completes. And all of these reports are going to be produced and available for you through our Q Global platform. So that about really covers the parts of the Bayley-4 that we can show you at this point. Hopefully you like what you see. You do need to be having you do need to be online when you're administering this test, and it can be administered via a tablet or a laptop. There is no particular preference one way or the other. However, I find the full screen part of a laptop to make things a little bit easier in terms of reading and viewing everything that you need to. But either tablet or laptop will work just fine for the administration of this test digitally. Okay, Paul, we'll toss it back over to you.
Thanks, James.
I'm going to stop sharing and bring it back to you. There you go.
Okay, let's take a look at scoring. Some of the scores that are available through the Bayley. There are a ton of scores, as you can see here. The cognitive, language, and motor scales, as well as the social, emotional, and adaptive behavior have subdomains that provide composite scores, percentile ranks, and confidence intervals, and growth scale values, as you can see here. There's one cut score that's available as for the sensory processing. So there are a ton of scores, and one of the things that we've said earlier, there's not one definition or agreed upon definition of delay. So these scores are provided in order to have different ways of looking at it and to provide the needs for those various scoring or mandated rules. So interpretation. So like I said, there are various ways to interpret what is a developmental delay. Some use percent of delay, others use standard deviations, and some are performance a number of months below chronological age. So whatever the definition is for your area, your state, this information is provided for you to use in that, for that purpose. There are also other observations that can be made, and we highly recommend that you do make, and I'm sure most of you employ this method. That is looking at, again, it's more incidental observations as you're administering the Bayley. And the Bayley is very well adapted for this kind of observation and providing an environment that can give you opportunity to observe some things that are not necessarily, they're very rare, so they're not necessarily part of a specific item or scale in the Bayley, but such things as eye movement, awkward eye position, hand movements, these muscle tone indicators that can give you kind of red flags or indicators of possible things like autism spectrum or cerebral palsy, things like that. There can early indications, early detection, early intervention, better prognosis, and can prepare for what is needed for that child. So just kind of a heads up on keeping an eye out for those observations. Again, the caregiver report I mentioned earlier is a very important tool that James just showed you a quick view of what it would look like. Again, this is something that really can help with the interaction with the caregivers, giving them good information about what is going on, what the test is measuring, and some things they can do at home to help the environment for the child. So a quick summary before we open it up for questions. The flexibility of administration, that's a big part of the administration. The serialized and related items can really help you to speed things up and get through the content rather quickly and smoothly. As we all know, toddlers and infants have a very short attention span. They are easily bored and fatigued very quickly. So this is a very important part of the process, is getting to know the content, familiarize yourself very well with it, and move through these things as quickly as possible so that you get a very reliable score, but at the same time you're getting a great score because you've utilized the attention and the strength and the energy that the child has available to them. We retained the 5 domains. The adaptive behavior now is from the Vineland-III. So you have a manual admin and scoring, but you also now have a digital option that James just showed you. And don't forget the Polytomous scoring of 0, 1, 2. It's very important to keep in mind. Now we have been asked several times about, can I just buy an update kit? So we crunched the numbers, which we tend to do a lot. And that if we were to try to do that, you would actually end up spending more because of all the various pieces that you'll need to purchase anyway that are part of the kit. So it does save you money just to go ahead and purchase a new kit and keep some of your other manipulatives and other parts that are the same as a backup. It works out really good. So the Bayley-4, as I said, is published this fall. September, I believe, is our target date. There's also a Bayley-4 screening test that will be published late this fall. So keep your eyes open for that if that's something that you are interested in. So again, here's my contact information like I promised. Please feel free to shoot me an email. Let me know how we're doing. If there's questions, if you have complaints, I'm okay with hearing those as well. Because the only way we can build the best test for what your needs are is to hear from you. So please feel free to contact me if you need additional information or have questions or concerns. So let's open it up for questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. There was a question about the adaptive behavior, whether or not that is included in the kit, the Bayley-4 kit, or if it would require separate purchase of the Vineland-III.
It is included with the kit, and it's with a starter kit. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to be packaged. I'm sure Shelley can help us with that.
Yeah, hi Paul. Yeah, I'll just chime in on that one. So the adaptive behavior component is a subset of items taken from the Vineland-III. So it's 140 items from the Vineland-III, and it is packaged in with the kit, and it's packaged with the social emotional form, just like it was with Bayley-III. So there's a social emotional and adaptive behavior form. So it's all included, and all the information you require is in the Bayley-IV manual. So you don't need to purchase any additional materials. It's all there for you.
Great.
Thank you. And then another question about whether or not young children might be distracted by use of a device, whether you're thinking about a laptop or maybe an iPad.
That's a great question, and that's going to vary dramatically by the individual setting, the individual child itself. And again, this is an additional tool that you can utilize if it fits your style, if it fits your environment, if it's something that you feel that a clipboard and a record paper record form will be less distracting, then there's obviously no problem with doing that. Also, the need for an internet connection is another issue. So I would always recommend to have a paper record form available, ready to go, and obviously be familiar with that procedure as well so that you can adapt as needed for a given situation.
Okay, thank you. And then there are a number of questions about training, and let me just address that. So there will be a number of different training options available once we publish the test. And the best way to get that type of information is through the Pearson assessment consultant who works with our Pearson customers in your region. So if you have those specific questions, you can send them through to Paul, and we will introduce you to the Pearson assessment consultant who works with your area so that you could get those questions about training answered. We'll certainly be providing on-site workshops And those, we might have some open workshops, but also most of the workshops are presented based on the request of customers. We'll also have some independent study training. But again, if you would email Paul, we'll connect you to the assessment consultant who works with our customers in your region. So that's
Absolutely.
about training. And let's see. Okay. Let's see what other questions we were having. Whether or not this would be part of the digital assessment library.
I can answer that one, Gloria.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I can answer that, Gloria. No, there aren't any plans at the moment to be part of the digital assessment library, but it is something we will be reviewing to determine whether we can make it part of that. So watch this space. It's just that it's not included at the moment, but we're looking at it.
Okay, thank you. And then a question about prematurity. Is it 36, 37, or 38 weeks, Shelley?
Do you know, I can't recall off the top of my head. I'm going to follow up with that one. I've just tried to look for the answer while we were talking, and I can't recall it. So what I should say is that if there are any questions on here that we can't answer, we will follow up via email with answers to those questions, and everybody will get those responses. So I will double check that one.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a question about logging into the digital scoring, whether different people, whether professionals from different disciplines can enter their scores. One of the things that I would say about the digital option is that the digital administration and scoring section that James showed us is certainly one option. But just like on the Bayley-III, if you're familiar with the Bayley-III, you can use the paper administration and then you can use the online scoring. So it depends on the way that you structure the account, whether or not a number of individuals can access the information. And James, maybe you can elaborate on that piece?
Yeah, in terms of who gets to and who doesn't get to use the digital administration part of it, accounts can be set up in a variety of different ways in terms of who has access to inventory or not. So if you want to purchase X amount of digital administrations and have that be a shared resource among a variety of staff, absolutely. Accounts can be structured that way. Alternatively, inventory can be assigned to individual practitioners. So the access to the digital administration can be structured to, I think, pretty much meet all of the core use case scenarios.
Okay, thank you. And then a question about the scores for the Bayley-4, Shelley. Noting that the Bayley-4 scores are similar to the scores on the Bayley-III. However, if you can address the issue that in different countries the Bayley-III seem to underestimate developmental delays and how we've addressed that.
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of things that we've done with Bayley-4. We have reduced the number of clinical cases in the standardization sample. We do see high correlations between Bayley-III and Bayley-4. There is a slight change on the mean scores, but it's a very, very slight change. But what we are attributing all that to, what we are seeing is that with things like the Polytomous scoring, the increased accuracy of scoring and the more efficient administration, so you're not seeing things, you're not seeing so many errors appearing during the administration, that the score that you are achieving are much more accurate. So we're seeing very high and higher reliabilities across a lot of the subscales. So we've looked at all different ways to address that, and I think we've done it. It's come out really nicely. All the things that we've done to look at that have established a really nice test that gives you a really good accurate results. So I think I addressed that question.
Okay, thank you. And then there are some questions about the fees for digital administration and scoring. And on our website, PearsonAssessments.com, and then going to the Bayley page, you could see the different options that are available, and certainly there is a paper administration option, and you could see the pricing for that option, and then you can also see the digital administration and scoring option, and you could see the pricing for that option as well. Okay, let's see if there are any other questions. There are some really specific questions about adjusting for prematurity, and we will address those offline. We will send you an email regarding those specific questions. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. How long will the Bayley-III protocols be available? Any word on that, Shelley?
Yeah, we usually continue to sell them while there's demand for at least 2 or 3 years. So I would say, they will be available over the next couple of years, but we will review it depending on demand and people migrating over to Bayley-IV. We know that not everybody can jump over straight away. We know it's best practice to use the most recent version of a test, but we know it takes some time for some organizations to be able to do that. So we accommodate for that over the next year or so.
Yes. And Alicia, we will respond to you via email. They should be available now, and they will be available for some time. So I want to follow up to make sure that we have an answer to your specific question here about the availability of the Bayley-III protocols. Okay, let's see. Okay. Can individual subtests be used to supplement other standardized tests such as language? And I would say certainly the answer to that question would be yes. As a clinician, it'll be important for us to have information on the 5 required developmental domains, and certainly that information can come from a comprehensive developmental assessment such as the Bayley, but you can also get that information from different sources as long as you have the data for each of those developmental domains. Any other thoughts on that, Paul?
No, that's exactly what I would say.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see what other questions. Okay. I think there are a few questions that we didn't get to, and as Shelley said, we will address those in follow-up emails. But if you have any additional questions, if you would send them to Paul, and then we will get that information to the right person who can respond to your specific questions. Paul?
Great. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your attendance. And like she said, if you have any questions, I'll put it back up there just in case you didn't get it. There's my email address. Please feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll make sure it gets to the appropriate place, or I'll answer it myself. So thanks again for attending. You guys have a great day.